Number 10. Offspring of Carnage. I mean, this one is right in the title, but it's still really important to note that Toxin is the child of Carnage. But what does this mean? Why is it significant? Well, when it comes to Carnage being the offspring of Venom, it was a symbiote that was inherently more powerful than its sire. So you can imagine that if that is the way it went before, that is the way it's gonna go this time. Toxin is even more powerful than both Carnage and Venom as the grandbaby of Venom. Hence why this symbiote caused such a stir in the symbiotic world when it first appeared, especially when it came to the concerns of both Toxin's parent and their grandparent. Number 9. Patrick Mulligan. Patrick Mulligan was Toxin's first host and was a police officer. With Patrick, Toxin was on a journey to learn what it meant to be a hero and attempted to walk in Mulligan's footsteps, doing their best to walk the walk and talk the talk of being a true hero. Despite having a secret darkness lurking within them that Toxin often had to fight against. Patrick unfortunately would be killed by Blackheart, the son of Mephisto, which was pretty bad news for Toxin. Toxin was then used by Blackheart to create his own symbiote warriors, and Blackheart took a chunk of the symbiote for himself as a sacrifice to be used in a ritual. Ouch. And friends, if you are loving this channel and this list, be sure to show your support for us over on Facebook, where you can also like and follow us. Yay! Number 8. Wanted Dead, Not Alive. The crazy thing about Toxin is just everything this poor symbiote has been through. It's more complex than other symbiotes due to it being the offspring of major sadistic villain Carnage, but still closely related to the now anti-hero, possibly full-on hero at this point, Venom. Which of course means that even to begin with, life was very much not smooth sailing for the symbiote. In the beginning, Toxin was actually actively hunted down by both Carnage and Venom, each symbiote wanting to destroy it for their own reasons. Carnage was basically worried about Toxin usurping it in regards to its evil ways and in regards to it being more powerful. Venom was worried about the symbiote's alignment with it being the child of Carnage and wanted to destroy it to avoid it becoming an even more deadly enemy. So almost as soon as it came into existence, Toxin was fighting simply to survive. Number 7. Superior Carnage. This version of Carnage came about when the symbiote was forcefully separated from a currently brain-dead Cletus Kasady by the Wizard. The symbiote refused to surrender to the Wizard's will, and so he had to remove the symbiote via blood transfusion, giving the blood to another unwilling participant, his ally Dr. Carlin Malice. Dr. Malice then became Carnage against his own wishes and became Wizard's loyal pet of sorts, making the Wizard's new Frightful Four pretty powerful, which of course is what he intended. That is of course until he lost control of Carnage, who ended up bonding with the Wizard instead, which also the Wizard was not down for, but that's how Carnage do sometimes. In the end, Superior Carnage would end up returning to Cletus once more, who was thought of as dead at this point, but it was revealed that he actually had survived an explosion that he was in, but was just really badly burnt. Because Cletus Kasady is pretty much impossible to kill, apparently. Even when he's dead, he's probably not dead. Number 6. Suppressed. Not only did Toxin come into the world with both Carnage and Venom teaming up to try and kill it, but then the symbiote also later experienced a pretty traumatic time when it was suppressed using drugs, which basically just made it like a passenger going along for the ride with host Eddie Brock. This happened as a result of Eddie getting taken in by the FBI, who decided to expose the symbiote to inhibitor drugs, which suppressed its own voice and consciousness in Eddie's mind. Toxin truly has had a pretty toxic upbringing, if you ask me. Could you imagine existing in a body without any control or influence over what it did? Sounds horrifying. Although I guess maybe this is kind of like some weird revenge, because technically I think Toxin did that to Eddie in the beginning. I guess we can only hope that Eddie and Toxin's will and desires were similar at this point in time. Number 5. Tel-Kar. Tel-Kar is a perfect example of how bonding to Sleeper can be less than ideal, let's say. Tel-Kar was a Kree kind of baddie when it came to the story of Venom and Sleeper anyways, although Tel-Kar's kind of a complicated character really. He bonded with Venom and forced the symbiote to stay merged with him against his wishes. As a result, Eddie Brock with Sleeper and Mlans attempted to rescue and stop Tel-Kar, who wanted to retrieve a bioweapon and ultimately tried to destroy all of humanity. In the end, Venom was freed from Tel-Kar's control, rebonding with preferred host Eddie Brock. Sleeper later ended up bonding with Tel-Kar and in essence basically lobotomized him? Sleeper then basically piloted around the brain-dead body of Tel-Kar until Tel-Kar was attacked, roused from his brain-dead state, and basically died while merged with the symbiote because he was attacked, leaving Sleeper to puppet around Tel-Kar's corpse for a time. Yikes. Number 4. Jubilile Van Scotter. Jubilile is the third host of Toxin. Toxin was passed on to her in the fight against Chthon, and before that she had her own symbiote and had also gained the Ray's symbiote as well. They were all together when they bonded to her. Jubilile's father passed away when she was a child, and a few years later she decided to set out and explore the world in his memory, as her father had been an experienced sailor who had taught her how to sail himself. She ran into Carnage, and a ritual he performed on her left her transformed, although not in the way he'd hoped. Instead of becoming his minion, she became empowered after being infected by a Darkhold augmented version of something similar to the Carnage symbiote, and which also tied her to Carnage and the villain's memories. Her connection to the Darkhold and the power of the symbiotes allowed Scotter to defeat Chthon, but seemingly at the risk of the lives of the symbiotes that she wielded. Seemingly anyways. Number 3. Carnage, Earth 20143. This alternate version of Carnage gave Spider-Man some massive trouble back in 2019 Spider-Verse in issue number 2. She also happened to act as Spider-Man's evil alter ego, as she herself, instead of becoming an alternate version of Spider-Man, became an alternate version of villain Carnage. Woo. Carnage of Earth 20143 is also an alternate version of Aunt May. Instead of just being a kind, charitable, sweet, yet no-nonsense caregiver or hero, she becomes instead a ruthless and heartless villain who believed free will did not exist and aimed to destroy all of her counterparts throughout the multiverse, as well as the counterparts of her allies. She fought alongside likewise evil yet non-super versions of her nephew Peter and her husband Ben, as well as an evil version of Miles Morales from her reality, who is still Miles Morales, so I believe he still had powers. Spider-Man had to harness the power of all of her superpowered alternates using the power of love from across the multiverse in order to defeat this Carnage. It was pretty intense, and we got to see a lot of alternate, I guess, Spider-Mams. There's like a Spider-Gwen, there's like a Venom, it's crazy. Number 2. Current host. Currently Toxin is bonded with Bren Waters. Bren and Toxin met at some point after Toxin's supposed death following the defeat of Chthon. The two decided to team up together, with Bren, a teenager, requesting that Toxin give them a more adult appearance, which makes sense if you're fighting crime. Toxin obliged, and so when fighting together they look more like Patrick Mulligan or Eddie Brock in regards to their overall intimidating, muscle-bound stature. We met Bren during the King in Black event, where we witnessed him and Toxin going out only to be accused of being part of the symbiote invasion by one of Alchemax's guardsmen, who they got into a fight with. The guardsman, it turned out, was actually Bren's father, Oscar, who apparently does not approve of symbiotes. Number 1. Most powerful symbiote, or at least almost the most powerful symbiote. Aside from Null maybe, or you know, just the King in Black in general, I think Null is in a league all of their own, and then it's basically between, for me, Toxin and anti-venom. But this is Toxin's list, so I think we can give them the most powerful title, at least here, you know, where they're alone on their list. Toxin is considered to be so powerful because of its heritage. Toxin is the child of Carnage, which is already an insanely powerful symbiote in terms of what it can do, and in terms of its resistance to standard weaknesses, such as sonics and fire. Toxin is super strong, agile, fast, durable, possesses superior stamina, has its own more efficient and specific version of spider sense, can shapeshift, camouflage, heal itself, crawl on walls, create webs, is a skill tracker, and has a toxic bite, after bonding with Eddie anyways. I don't think they had the toxic bite originally. Number 10. Child of Venom. As was mentioned in the intro, Sleeper is one of the symbiotic offspring of Venom. This pregnancy was not forced by a villainous science corporation like the Life Foundation. Sleeper, however, is the youngest child of Venom, who at this point has 7 spawn total. 7 babies! That's a lot of babies. Although not including potential cloned offspring, if you want to consider them that evolved from a piece of Venom, such as Mania. Although I guess you could also kind of consider Mania more like Venom's cloned sibling. Oh man, spider things and clones, they just go together like bread and butter. Venom's children from oldest to youngest at the time of this recording anyways are Carnage and the Batch 5 forcibly harvested by the Life Foundation, Scream, Agony, Riot, Lasher, and Phage, and then of course Sleeper, little baby Sleeper. Number 9. A difficult birth. Venom had a challenging birth even when it came to bringing Sleeper into the world. The symbiote was aided by Dr. Steven of Alchemax when it came to bringing its new spawn Sleeper into this world. But the birth was so challenging that Eddie Brock also decided to basically lend his help. Sleeper was the first child of Venom that Eddie was actually somewhat aware of when it came to Venom being pregnant, and was kind of the first child that they had together as more of a unit. Although Venom avoided telling Eddie about the pregnancy, only confessing after it was revealed that they were about to spawn. Of course, Venom was kind of like, you know, I kind of thought you knew, I kind of thought you felt that this thing was happening, but guess you didn't know, and I was kind of scared to talk to you about it. Seeing the difficulty that Venom was having in giving birth to Sleeper, Eddie decided to lend his strength to the symbiote to help it with the birth, choosing to remain bonded with Venom while Sleeper was being born for basically as long as he possibly could, despite being warned about how dangerous this actually was to Eddie. Although eventually Eddie would separate from Venom in their final moments of childbirth. Of symbiote birth? I don't know. Technically Sleeper is still a child when it's born. No? Just a symbiote child. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show love for us and our channel on other platforms, head on over to Facebook where you can show your support by giving us a follow and a like. Number 8. First appearance. Sleeper made its first appearance in 2018 in issue 165 of Venom. The symbiotic character was created by Mark Bagley and Mike Costa. Initially, when it was born in issue 165, it wasn't actually given a name, often being referred to as the child or the child of Venom. During the series Venom First Host, which came out in the fall of 2018, a few months later, the newborn baby would take the name of Sleeper after bonding to Eddie Brock in order to go on an adventure to basically save Venom. Its name comes from its power to put others to sleep using chemicals that it can produce. A fairly unique power, and you know, that's not all Sleeper can do either, so talk a little bit more about that later. Hang in there on the list to hear more. Number 7. Eddie Brock. Even though Eddie is more well known for being the host of Venom, Toxin's grandparent, Eddie was also at one point bonded with the Toxin symbiote as well. Is that weird? Probably. Especially considering the two were forced to team up, and this was also a time when Eddie was terrified of symbiotes, and then they actually fought against the Venom symbiote together. Initially, they each had their vendetta against the new Venom, Agent Venom, aka Flash Thompson, but ultimately they were both dissuaded from following through with their plan to attack and kill Venom. Instead, the two teamed up and decided to accept their newfound bond. Eddie with Toxin decided to return to his more lethal protector approach, becoming an anti-hero once more alongside Toxin. Number 6. Protective parents. Initially, it was believed that the birth of Sleeper was unsuccessful and that the symbiote was actually stillborn. However, 2 pages after this misdirect in issue 165 of Venom, we learn that Sleeper is actually alive and well, thank goodness, and is under the care of Alchemax and Liz Allen. Eddie and the Venom symbiote decide to leave the newborn in Alchemax's care to be studied, but only if the testing done is all non-invasive and under the expectation that they will get to visit Sleeper twice a week to spend time with the child and make sure it is being well looked after, and of course to give it proper guidance as it grows up, like all good parents try to do. Pretty cute stuff. Venom also stipulates that Sleeper is not to bond with the host at such a young age, as they consider this could damage Sleeper's psyche and misguide the child before it is actually more sure of its sense of self. In fact, even when Eddie later bonds with it, it's kinda like, I don't think we should bond yet. I don't think you're ready. You're a baby. You don't even have a name yet, Sleeper. Number 5 is Spider-Carnage Earth 616. While in the animated Spider-Man series we had a character who also went by this name, in the comics it was a different host entirely who went as Spider-Carnage, Ben Reilly. Spider-Carnage was the name that the symbiote took when it bonded with Ben Reilly after temporarily being bonded to John Jameson. However, this was all just a ruse. The symbiote didn't really want to actually be attached to Jameson, but instead wanted to find a host worthy of it. As soon as it seemed Ben was defeating John as Carnage, the symbiote jumped onto him. Even though John was trying to warn him, he's like, don't fight me, it's a trap. Ben Reilly tried to resist but failed and temporarily became the now superpowered and symbiotic character known as Spider-Carnage. This all went down in Amazing Spider-Man issue 410 of the original volume. However, this was the peak of 90s Spider-Man, so you'd have to move over to the Just Spider-Man series to continue his story, because that's how it was back then. There were so many Spider-Man comics. They were like, read this issue, then read this other series, then read the other series, and you were like, what's happening? Number 4, Mlans. Also, I'm just gonna apologize if I'm not saying that right for all my Skrulls in the chat. Obviously, I have not met very many Skrulls in my life, and I feel like I'm always messing up Skrull names, so sorry to any Skrulls out in the cosmos. M'Lans was a temporary ally of Sleeper and Eddie Brock, and in a way of Venom. M'Lans was a Skrull soldier who had at one point captured Tel-Kar, keeping him as a prisoner and treating him pretty cruelly. She was part of the Skrull warrior group known as the War Sisters. Eventually Tel-Kar escaped his captives, killing all of M'Lans' War Sisters in the process. Also, for those of you that don't know, Skrull and Kree, not right now in the comics, but in general, usually hate each other because they're usually at war. And they were at this time. M'Lans later attempted to hunt down Tel-Kar, who had come to reclaim the Venom symbiote. As a result, M'Lans teamed up with Eddie Brock and Sleeper in their pursuit of Venom and Tel-Kar. Sleeper would bond with M'Lans in order to save her life. When she parted ways with the saved Venom as well as Eddie Brock and Sleeper, she said that she hoped that she would never meet them again. The next time she met symbiotes, it actually went very poorly, so I feel like her wishes here make a lot of sense in retrospect. She would later be killed by a different member of the Clintar who was under the influence of King in Black Null and was bonded to her comrade, a Super Skrull who went by the codename of Virtue. And this was after actually Skrull and Kree decided to put their differences aside and make the alliance. So both of them were working for Emperor Hulkling and Talos. Number 3. Many seeming deaths of Toxin. So many deaths. Toxin has seemingly died on more than one occasion, with the symbiote being set on fire twice and being suspected dead during at least one of those instances, back when Toxin was bonded with Eddie Brock and the two fought against Venom, who was bonded with Flash Thompson at the time. However, it turned out that Toxin survived on both occasions due to being so powerful and so durable. Later on, Toxin would be believed dead for a few years after facing Chthon, along with another unnamed symbiote and the Ray symbiote. However, it turned out it survived this battle as Toxin reappeared during the King in Black event. Number 2. Hank. Hank is probably the latest host of Sleeper, at least I think so, because Hank was like 2021 and it's only 2022 right now while I'm recording this. Although, as we said earlier, Sleeper isn't really big on hosts normally. However, Sleeper agreed to bond with Hank in secret in order to protect him as a favor to Flash Thompson. Flash recruited Hank to be a part of a security detail. Suspicious of what Carnage might be up to, Flash and Hank basically worked security for Senator Peter Crane. Flash thought that the Senator might have become overtaken by the Carnage symbiote, who was planning to use the Senator to get close to and assassinate the president. Basically, they were trying to make sure the Senator didn't get overtaken by Carnage, but then at one point they were like, maybe he already has been. In the end, it was revealed that Crane's son, Arthur, was actually bonded with Carnage instead. Haha. Hank ends up being stabbed through by Carnage, but is saved by Sleeper, who then basically takes over for the host, sedating him so that Hank is none the wiser, and so that Hank can also rest as Sleeper helps him to recover. Sleeper and Toxin, who is bonded with Flash, work together to stop Carnage, with Hank later having pretty much no recollection of this fight, because he was sedated, so he was like, I don't know. And they were like, we'll just won't tell him he was bonded with the symbiote, because you know, it's kind of weird. Number 1. Chemokinesis. One of Sleeper's most interesting powers, of course Sleeper also has powers similar to all the other symbiotes, is their ability to produce various different chemicals which can be used for a variety of effects. Some other symbiotes can do things like produce acid, but none other symbiotes that I know of have chemokinesis on the same scale as Sleeper, so it's quite a cool and unique ability to see. Sleeper can use the chemicals it produces to burn its opponents or defend itself with acid-like emissions, or to manipulate others. It can sedate, knock out, elate, persuade a target, or even cause someone to hallucinate. Aside from that, it's also believed that Sleeper can use chemicals to manipulate the thoughts and emotions of targets, and even kind of like communicate with people telepathically using these chemicals, presumably. Sleeper can even insert ideas into the minds of those it chooses to affect, so like I said, it's pretty persuasive. Number 10. Carnage. Earth 7642. This alternate version of Carnage comes to us from the Spider-Man and Batman team-up comic. He hails from Earth 7642, an alternate Earth where New York City's Spidey and his foes and Gotham City's Batman and his foes both coexist. Carnage in this reality was cured of his insanity, violent and homicidal tendencies by being implanted with an inhibitor chip. However, this chip was disabled by his symbiote, returning him to normal. Escaping captivity, he managed to successfully kidnap Joker, who also had an inhibitor chip, keeping him sane. Cletus disabled Joker's chip and proposed a team up, but the two villains unfortunately couldn't agree on a method when it came to how to terrorize. Joker wanted something more elaborate in a scheme, whereas Carnage just wanted, well, Carnage. In the end, Carnage was defeated in an interesting turn of events by the uncoordinated efforts of both Joker and Batman. Number 9. Carnage, Earth 311. Carnage of Earth 311 was known by the name Canis Cassidy. He claimed to be possessed not by a symbiote but by what he referred to as a demon. Earth 311 is the reality belonging to Marvel's 1602 universe created by Neil Gaiman. This alternate version of Carnage, however, was not a creation of Mr. Gaiman himself, but instead was created by Mike Costa and David Baldione, making his first appearance as a side character in one of the stories included in 2015's The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. In fact, I think that's his only appearance thus far. He was the leader of the Sinister Sextet, who were admittedly pretty handily defeated by the Web Warriors in said story. However, it should be noted that the Sinister Sextet therefore went up against not one Spider-Man, woman, or totem, but instead 5 of them. Number 8. Carnage, Earth 1610. Carnage in the Ultimate Universe has no attachment to its usual host Cletus Cassidy. The symbiote is not alien in origin, but instead, like Venom in this universe, was created in a lab. The creature was made out of samples left over from Richard Parker's experiments, combined with Peter's unique DNA. Carnage, when unleashed, would end up being a monster who ultimately killed Gwen Stacy due to it possessing fragments of Peter's memories. It needs to consume humans in order to survive in the beginning, but otherwise had powers similar to its 616 counterpart. It could shapeshift and was considered to be immensely strong. However, it also possesses a unique ability as well. It was able in essence to recreate the deceased Gwen Stacy, producing a clone of her. This clone was permanently bonded to the symbiote and herself would become known as Carnage. The only downside as well was that as clone Gwen was frightened of Carnage, her powers were unstable and unpredictable. The good news is though, Carnage when bonded with Gwen basically didn't need to eat humans anymore for some reason, so yay! And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Carnage lists as we prepare for this movie, which is coming out at the end of the month, at the beginning of October, I am so excited! Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And let us know in the comments if you're excited about Let There Be Carnage. I'm excited. I have faith in Woody Harrelson, so I'm pretty excited about it. Number 7. Venom/Brock family tree. The cool thing about Sleeper is that they are not just a child of Venom, but also in a way they're kind of a child of Eddie Brock. Eddie was present when Sleeper was born, and of course chose to remain bonded with Venom during most of that birth. Because of this, and also because Eddie was a primary host to Venom and later to Sleeper, the Sleeper symbiote thinks of Eddie like a father as well. So really, Sleeper has a symbiote father and a human father, and is also kind of like the love child of the bond between Eddie and Venom. Although to be clear, symbiotes reproduce asexually, so Eddie wasn't really involved in any kind of like genetic participation when it came to Sleeper's creation and birth. Dylan is Eddie's son, and Sleeper also thinks of Dylan as kind of like a human brother of sorts, which is also pretty cute. Number 6. Red Goblin. Red Goblin might not have additional powers like some of the other alternates on this list, but he does add additional psychopathic tendencies, not that Carnage needed any more of those, and smarts. Red Goblin is what you get when you put 2 of Spider-Man's main arch nemeses, Norman Osborn and Carnage, together, and boy is he really ruthless. This gave us a version of the symbiote who almost got Peter Parker to quit being Spider-Man in order to protect his loved ones against Red Goblin. Red Goblin basically threatened to devour said allies and family members of Peter if he did not revoke the Spider-Man mantle. And if you can believe it, Peter agreed. However, Peter did not stop fighting. He just did so not as Spider-Man, but instead as Peter. So he was like, I'm not gonna do it. And everyone was like, and then the next issue he was like, I'm gonna do it as Peter, it's fine. Though of course, even as Peter Parker, he still had superpowers and he called in backup to help. I think he just wasn't wearing his mask. He may have even still been wearing his Spider-Man suit. I mean, with someone like Red Goblin, you're also gonna need all that help, so it's probably good that he called in the cavalry, if you will. Norman's time as Red Goblin ended up driving him even more crazy, and in the end left Norman thinking he was actually Cletus Cassidy for a while. I think he's back to normal now. Pretty sure he's back to normal now. I mean, normal. What is normal for Norman? Number 5. Agender. Although we used the term son in the title of this list, and I've said it before, and although Toxin is sometimes referred to as the son of Carnage, which is also why we use that term, Toxin is really neither son nor daughter. All symbiotes are considered agender, meaning they don't really have genders. Some choose to present more masculine or more feminine, and others choose to present more neutral, but Toxin and other symbiotes from Clintar are, don't really come with genders, and they reproduce asexually, all on their own. Although they do sometimes get some outside help when it comes to birthing new symbiotes, which the Venom symbiote received at one point from Eddie Brock, who remained bonded to it during a birth to kinda like support it. Sometimes symbiotes have been prone to use words like daddy, and some even seem more drawn towards certain genders when it comes to the host that they choose. But technically, they don't have genders themselves, and are more gender fluid, usually when it comes to their presentation. Symbiotes being both agender and able to asexually reproduce also means though that at any point past their maturity, Toxin could basically produce an offspring all of their own that would likely be even more powerful even than Toxin, which I don't know what that symbiote is like, but I don't know if I want to meet that symbiote. Sounds insane. Number 4. Bizarnage. Bizarnage is the amalgam version of Carnage who is seemingly combined with Bizarro in this universe. Bizarnage is Project Cadmus's attempt to recreate alien DNA. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, it didn't go as smoothly as planned, and instead they ended up creating the crystalline monster known as Bizarnage. Bizarnage possesses the powers of Carnage vs 616 and can bond with other beings. It also is quite adept at evading attacks and possesses hyper-intelligence. Bizarnage is a foe of Spider-Boy, himself a combination of Spider-Man and Superboy. Spider-Man from Marvel, Superboy from DC. Number 3. Flying solo. Sleeper actually prefers to not have a host at all, or if it has one, to basically be in full control almost at all times. Sleeper isn't a huge fan of bonding or merging with others, and is somewhat unique in the sense that it actually has no need of a host really at all. We've seen other symbiotes go without a host in recent years, by the way, but the initial explanation for why symbiotes like Venom even merged with the host at all was because without one, and without certain chemicals produced by the human brain, they would basically starve and die. In fact, this was also why Venom was always threatening to basically eat people, and why Venom developed an obsession and need for chocolate. Sleeper, however, does not seem to need a host at all, producing humanoid or other forms independently without actually needing to be merged to anybody, not needing a host to survive. This could be because of Sleeper's chemokinesis powers. I mean, technically, if it needs any chemicals, could it not just make those chemicals itself? I don't know. I don't know if we've ever gotten into that, but I just feel like that's an explanation that makes sense to me. Number 2. Spider Carnage Animated. Definitely one of the most horrifying versions of Carnage out there as well. This version of Carnage comes to us from Spider-Man the Animated Series from the 90s. He is an alternate reality version of Peter Parker who lost both his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben, oh no, causing him to go to a very, very dark place. In his own reality, he would later bond with Carnage, who had entered his Earth through an interdimensional portal. Due to all the tragedy that he'd suffered, Peter, as Spider Carnage, became corrupted and set out to destroy all of reality. Once foiled, he headed to another reality to try again, but this time was redeemed by the main animated continuity Spider-Man, who teamed up with a still-alive alternate reality version of Uncle Ben. Together they were able to reach out, reawaken, and remind Spider Carnage of the goodness still inside him. Unable to rid himself of the symbiote, however, Spider Carnage opted to sacrifice himself in order to ensure everyone's safety. Number 1. Carnage Cosmic. In the reality verse 616, Norrin Rad ended up coming into contact with the Carnage symbiote, who bonded to him, abandoning his host Cletus Cassidy. But in Marvel's What If Volume 2, issue 108, it all goes down a little bit differently. Instead of the symbiote returning to Cletus, in this What If reality of Earth 985, Carnage remained bonded to the Silver Surfer, permanently becoming the Carnage Cosmic. Sort of permanently anyways. So not only does this version of Carnage have all the power it usually possesses as a symbiote and child of Venom, but it also has access to the Silver Surfer's power cosmic as well. Of course, in the end, this version of Carnage is defeated, but only one Silver Surfer manages to regain some control long enough to fly himself and the symbiote, now permanently bonded with him, into the sun. Cry a little tear for Carnage Cosmic.